Good evening and welcome to another episode of Eddie V Live. I'm your host. We have a good show for you tonight, a great show. But first, do we have anything to get into for it? I just said that, but I didn't really think about it before. It's so funny. Right before I go live, I try to find like any and every excuse to not start the show. I was literally like going through my notes, going on my phone, and then I don't think about what I'm going to say in the beginning. But I hope you're having a good Thursday. A good Thursday. I am having a good Thursday. Honestly, I'm like a regular wage slave. When I hit like every week, it's the same, and I think it's gonna be different every week. Every week when I hit Wednesday, like halfway through the workday on Wednesday, I want to kill myself. And then you're just like gassed. You're like, I can't do it another second. But then you get through it and it's fine. But then when you hit like when I hit like Sunday morning, afternoon, I'm like, I'm enjoying life too much. I should do something that sucks. So maybe I should go back to work. So it's like it works out perfectly, honestly. So you have like Thursday and Friday daytime where it's like, and people were in like gulags, so it's like I need to stop complaining. Does anyone else feel that? I feel like there's people out there that they love their job. I know people that do overtime on purpose. So, and I don't even think they need the money. So I think I might be alone in that. Anything else? People just depressing me. Yeah, but that's not really something that's going on. That's just a constant. That's just a constant thing. But anyway, we should get started with the show. Today, I want to have a free, open discussion. I've maybe mentioned it before, but the fact that our society is very Protestant Jewish, it's very dominated by those things. I had a buddy who wanted me to talk about, I think he wanted me to talk about what that meant. So hopefully this will kind of, it'll get into it. I didn't like have a very focused, I usually have like a script or a prompt I'm going through. This, I'm just want a free ball. I was thinking about it today and I was like, I tried to organize my thoughts and it's just too big of a subject. So I just want to free ball it tonight. Just open up the discussion. Hopefully, if people have questions specifically, I'll respond. Or if anyone wants to argue, we can argue about that. But this is not my idea. I mean, this has been talked about forever. A writer I love is Hilaire Belloc, if you don't know already. Incredible English historian. I would say he's mostly a historian. People call him like an apologist or something. And he does that too, but I primarily think of him as a historian. And then also E. Michael Jones, more contemporary to us. He writes about this, and I actually want to use one of his terms to start this off. He talks about the triple melting pot. The triple melting pot. You've probably heard of the melting pot, which is like America's melting pot. We like melt all of these different cultures, religions, ethnicities, races together, and we're just about freedom, man. Triple melting pot. I think it's actually a Jewish idea. I don't know if E. Michael Jones talks about that or if it's just my own brain. But I'm pretty sure the Jews pushed that. And the reason they pushed that, different theories, I believe it's just because they want to protect themselves. They're a very specific ethnicity. They've been around a long time, and religion, obviously. And to protect themselves, to make themselves not as the focus of a nation, not as much on them. Something outside. They want to create a very open society so they can kind of do their thing and not be persecuted or something. So triple melting pot, with the triple part, in America, E. Michael Jones argues, and I think he's correct on this, we have three major groups, and it's based on religion. It's not based on anything else. So I'll talk about that first, then I'll get into my thoughts. And those three groups are Protestants, Jews, and Catholics. I'm not saying those are the only groups in America, or he's not saying that. They're saying that those are the three dominant religions. And I would argue, and he might maybe argue this as well, like religion is the most important, I don't even know what you call it, characteristic of a people. It's more important than their language, than their race, ethnicity, culture. I mean, it's a part of their culture. And so those three are the most dominant. And I would say Catholics of those three are a minority. not in terms of numbers, but in terms of influence on the society. Our society is a Protestant Jewish society. I would say it's more Protestant than Jewish, but I would say the power of the Jews is increasing over time. Voice crack. So, what do I mean by that? What does that mean to live in a Protestant Jewish culture? It's really complicated, but I do want to start with the Protestants. So, what are Protestants? Protestants, most people go to Martin Luther, and to an extent that's true, but to an extent that's not true. What is Protestantism? Martin Luther, he's opposing, if you want to make it super general, people always use indulgences, sure, but he's in general opposing corruption of the clergy. That's what he's opposing. And in theory, that is just an internal dialogue, an internal reform. Clergy, that has happened before. I think of the 11th century, like what is St. Gregory the Seventh doing? A big thing he's doing is he's reforming the clergy. And it's not, it shouldn't be a surprising thing, like why are the clergy always getting corrupt? Anyone who has real authority, that is the attack, that's the devil's attack plan there. They're going to try to, the devil's going to try to invert that. The demons are going to try to invert that. Also, because of our fallen nature, we're always trying to usurp authority. We're always trying to use authority for dastardly means. So yeah, so the clergy always need reforming, and that's just constant. Even as individuals, we need reforming all the time. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. I always do that. But Martin Luther is primarily going against corruption of the clergy, which is at that time pretty legitimate. His points, you could go step by step and argue them if they're legit or not. But in general, that is a valid position to have, I would say, from what I've read from 16th century Christendom. There was a lot of corruption in the clergy, whether it's money, in terms of avarice, lust, these types of things. So that's going on. But what really happens with what really is Protestantism, and it kind of gets out of Martin Luther's hands, I'll stick with the Germans, is that the German princes are going to use Martin Luther and use his reform movement to basically just steal church land. That's all they're doing. So it's basically about money. It becomes about money. So what is Protestantism? It is a justification for looting church land, church wealth. And it's going to happen differently in England, but that's also what happens with that branch of Protestantism, because they're different branches from each other, is that it's going to be a justification for looting. That's what it is. So when you have that as the origin, it's going to affect the culture that springs out of that, out of a theology that is supporting an economic theft. Like that, not even economic theft. I'll just say, theft in general. When you have a theology that's justifying theft, it's going to be very interesting. And basically, Protestantism has created cultures where it's very productive. Do not get me wrong. Like, think of the British Empire. The British Empire was the empire, if you think about it, really. I can't think of a more dominant empire. You can think of the Roman Empire even, but the British were conquering lands that the Roman Empire never dreamed of conquering, with their navy. It's a massive empire, and that is a Protestant empire, you can argue. They're very productive. They're very economically focused. They also make societies where they're productive and it makes you want to kill yourself. So it's like, and then, because the theology is so bad because it's built on theft, justifying theft, it usually leads to atheism because the theology doesn't make any sense. It's like loosely based on Christianity, but it's really, the history of it is just justifying theft. So what do I mean by that? It's justifying theft. So let's look at John Calvin as a specific example, because he kind of builds the blueprint of Protestantism. If it was just Luther doing his thing, I don't even think there would be a solid structure called like Protestantism. Calvin's the guy that writes the book that is Protestantism, that is systematic Protestantism. And let's look at how he views labor and money. So Calvin views labor as producing products for the sake of profit, for the sake of saving, for the sake of amassing capital, amassing more and more productive wealth. That's what he thinks. And a big one we can look at, so that's how he views labor. But when he views money, he's going to be the guy who's going to look at the Old Testament and he's going to justify usury. What are the Catholics super against at this time? Because we never talk about it now. But the Catholics are very against usury. The Catholics view money as a dead thing. Money can't produce more money. People produce value and money. You have to have human labor to do that. Whereas the Protestants, they start to shift back, you could argue, to usury, where usury is viewing money as something that like gives birth. Like you just put your money in a bank and it makes money on itself. Or you give out a loan and the money is making more money for you just from sitting there, from time. And that's very distorted. That's a very, compared to Catholic, scholastic, and just traditional teaching, that is very foreign. Catholics view money as a tool. They view it with suspicion. If someone has a lot of money or a lot of productive property, that's viewed as with suspicion. It's supposed to be. Traditionally, it was with Catholics. And this kind of ties into yesterday I was talking about a little bit, is like worship of rich people. That's a Protestant thing. That's seen as like, oh, they're very on it. They're good work ethic. You always hear about the Protestant work ethic. It's like, oh, very productive, very economically smart, and we love that. Whereas a Catholic is like, the reason a Catholic works is like, I work to help my community and to sustain and to consume for myself, for my family, for my community, my nation, etc. Catholics work to consume, which sounds weird actually. But when the Catholic works is like, oh, we need food. So I apply my labor to provide value, and I will, in exchange, receive some sort of benefit, food, shelter, whatever. It's for that thing. And it's not for like amassing that. It's not for taking more than I need, right? Amassing wealth, productive property, and stuff like that. It's just a different way of doing things. And I think the biggest thing you can see from a Catholic perspective, I would argue, is that the Catholic is able to get to a point where they're at rest. They have reached a certain earthly temporal fulfillment. And you can see this in England. I'll be very general about it, but you can look into this. There's a point in England where the peasantry, the rich people, are trying to figure out how to get the peasantry to make more money in like the 1500s, to be more productive in the 1500s. And so they decide, I'm going to butcher this right now, but they decide to start paying more or jacking up the price that it costs to buy goods, thinking that the Catholics will want to produce more because now they can make more money off of it. Not necessarily all Catholics, just the peasants. And what did the peasants do? The peasants actually work less because like, oh, if you're going to pay us more for the same amount, we don't need to supply as much of it. That's the Catholic attitude. Is like we're just doing the thing to provide, and then we get to a certain point and we don't need more, we don't need excess. So now we have leisure. And leisure, well, I'm not going to get into it, but leisure has to do with worship of God. But anyway, so you can kind of see the different perspectives of Protestant versus Catholic, and then apply that to our current culture. America is insanely productive. We are even though everyone hates work, it's so interesting. We all hate work. The work has become bureaucratic. It's very, this is my opinion, very soul-sucking. And a lot of the work doesn't seem to be doing, a lot of things that you would consider good for society. Think of insurance. Think of how many people work in insurance and how soul-sucking just the idea of insurance is. Health insurance, life insurance. So, but we're very productive, in terms of the GDP, in terms of the products that we produce. We produce a lot of stuff. And obviously, we're a more technological society. I would argue that is also a Protestant thing. Because of the Protestant productivity, the love of money, the love of profit, we have become so innovative for the sake of money, not for the sake of just inventing stuff. It's really interesting. You have in the Catholic Middle Ages and even in the Roman Empire, there are inventions happening, and you can read about this stuff where they're just inventing it to see if they can do it. And they don't make a profit off it or anything. They're just like, this is going to be for fun. An example you can look up is like steam turbines or steam engines. So it seems from what information we have that the Romans have some sort of steam turbines, and also the Middle Ages do, probably from the Romans, but they're not trying to make these into like some product to give everyone and to sell. They think it's fun. They do it for fun, to like as a show. They just think it's interesting. And you can think of like a figure like St. Albert the Great, where he's obsessed with the natural sciences. He loves it, but he's not obsessed with it so he can like figure out how to make the next new product for the Middle Ages. He's just curious about it. He just wants to know more about it. And that's it. Whereas nowadays, it's like, what is the next person? They want to make the next technology, the next app, whatever. It's like, what is their primary purpose? Is like, they want to be a businessman. They want to make some cash. They want to, build an empire of businesses and stocks and all that stuff. That is Protestant. That is not Catholic. It's not saying Catholics aren't avaricious or anything. I'm just saying with the ideals of a Catholic culture, it frowns on those things. You probably, if they still did that, if you put like Saint Bernardine of Siena into the 21st century, he'd probably be preaching against all of that. He'd be like, why don't you guys take some leisure to worship God, to go pray, stop worrying about amassing wealth for yourself all the time. Saving, I'm not against saving, but like our obsession with like retirement and saving is not a Catholic thing. And this has to do with other factors too, the disruption of the family, which has to do with the Protestant view of marriage, which gets super like, it's crazy that Protestants are like, yeah, you can get divorced. Is that Christian? That is not a Christian concept. That is a Protestant concept, which you could argue, it's debatable. You'd have to read a lot to get to the bottom of this, but you can argue they get it from the Old Testament. And Protestants will do that a lot. Protestants with their sola scriptura, they've lost the ability to read the Old Testament in light of the New. So Protestants in that way are connected to the Jews, because obviously the Jews don't mess with the New Testament at all. And the Protestants will reach back and they'll take the Old Testament at face value because it benefits them. It benefits their theft of property. It benefits their different moral views. You even have a Protestant nowadays. I saw this the other day. It was crazy. I don't know how famous this guy is, but there's a Protestant, and Protestants are going to be like, that's not what we do. I get it. Yeah, I know. But this is what happens when you have this reaching back to the Old Testament. You don't understand how it relates to the New. He's going to reach back in the Old Testament and be like, actually, polygamy is okay. I can have multiple wives. And he had like 2 wives. And it's like, yeah, because once you break the authority, you're just going to reach back. Protestants originally did it for theft of church property. But then when you want to have more than one wife, you're going to reach back in the Old Testament and take that. So that's the relation to the Jews, because they're going to seem a lot like the Jews. Because the Jews, obviously, they look at the Torah, and then obviously they have the new writings. And then let me get into how the Jews affect American society. So the Jews are kind of interesting. So Protestants and Catholics, we're both universal. What does that mean? In a sense, is that anyone of any race, nationality, culture, etc., you can become Protestant, you can become Catholic. They're universal religions, as well as Islam, universal religion. The Jews are not like that. The Jews are not a universal religion. It's ethnically based. It's a religion, but it's based on ethnicity. And you see that again in the Old Testament, the Old Testament people. And so what is that going to mean for their religion? They're a very tribal religion. And you can see that in the Old Testament. They stick with their people. They got their people's backs. The universal morality doesn't necessarily apply to Jews as it does in theory to Christians and Muslims. Is that the morality of a Christian is universal. It's like everyone should follow it, and it applies to everyone. Whereas with the Jews, they have we treat Jews a certain way and we treat Gentiles a certain way. So that's kind of the background of the Jews. And then they got their whole own sola scriptura stuff with the Talmud, other documents. I'm not going to say their names because I'll butcher them. And obviously the Torah. And what is this going to mean for America? So in America, we have this phenomenon, and this has happened before, it's not a new thing, where the Jews have gained an immense power, I would argue mostly through usury. They've gained immense power in the US without now they're affecting it for their own means and gains. And how are they doing this? Well, one thing the Jews always seem to do or to apply, and this just seems powerful people in general, and this is something E. Michael Jones has covered masterfully, is that the Jews always try to use pornography or just sexual deviance in general to control. For control and maybe sometimes necessarily for their own, you know, pleasures and stuff like that. I'm not saying all Jews do that. That's just something that is tied to them, especially in America today. And you see this in Hollywood. Hollywood since the 20s, maybe even before that, but definitely since the 20s, 30s, has been dominated by the Jews. And this comes from the Jewish gangsters, and we don't have to get into that. And what do they immediately try to do is they're trying to get pornography in the theaters. That is repugnant to Christian morality. But to the Jew, for their own gain, and if for their own gain, whether it's financial profit immediately or for to dominate and control society over a long period of time, that is to their benefit, and they will do that. They don't see anything universally immoral about them trying to do that. Do you see what I'm saying? And to an example that E. Michael Jones brings up, it's a really cool one, is in 2002, I believe it was, the nation of Israel, which is a Jewish nation ruled by Jews, they broadcast into Gaza, into Palestine, pornography. Why would they do that? It's for free. They're not making them pay for it. It's literally, if they turned on any channel, these Palestinians, they turn on any channel, it's pornography being broadcast from Israel. Why would they do that? And you have to think about that. Why would they do that? And the argument is that they use it to control a population. When you have people that are addicted in that sort of way, a lustful way, they are so malleable. You have them, basically. That's why it's so important to freedom. I mean, just in a salvation sense, but just in a, oh, sorry, my neck's a little tight. Just in a political sense, any sense. If you want to control someone, get them addicted to, you know, XYZ thing that has to do with lust, self-abuse, pornography, etc. So the Jews in America, you can see their dominance in their control of these different aspects of our lives and their ability to use it to promote their own power. So this is less complicated as the Protestant thing is, because the Protestant thing is it's an authentic belief that they have, right? Prosperity, productiveness. They truly believe that. But the Jews, they don't necessarily like believe in pornography. It's something that they use, and that is what is affecting our society. So when you have a society where everyone is very promiscuous, is very addicted to porn, very addicted to self-abuse, all these different things, that is not a Protestant effect. So you have to ask, where is that coming from? And I would say it's primarily coming from the Jews. Because for a Christian, those things are repugnant. Those things are immoral. Even if Christians are addicted to those things, if a true Christian, if he's addicted to pornography, he's addicted to it, but he knows that it's wrong and he doesn't want it. Whereas the Jew doesn't necessarily believe that it's right or wrong. Some Jews probably would say it's wrong, but a lot of them don't. And you can look it up. I'm pretty sure Dennis Prager talks about this, if you want just one example, about how porn is actually not that bad. And to a Christian, you're like, what? That's crazy. But that's just the reality. That's what we got. So when we're looking at American culture, American society, it's important. I don't know. This might help you. Actually, I think it will help you practically, especially if you're addicted to pornography. But if you understand what's going on, that can help you move in the world. That's why I'm always telling people to like abandon movies, abandon streaming services, stuff like that. Not necessarily saying everything on it is bad, but these things are specifically used to manipulate and control a population. And even if you want to look at who owns that stuff, like go look at it. Go look at it. Like who's going to be owning it? I already know who owns it. And I think you do too. But it's worth a look, because if I just say it and you don't see it in front of your eyes, it's just going to kind of remain like a very vague thing out there. But if you look it up for yourself, you're like, oh wow, that's who owns that, and they're putting all these shows that just basically have pornography all over the place. They're trying to control you. And then obviously you could get into why they're trying to control you in terms of specific current events. I think that's obvious right now. If you don't know that, I'm a little concerned about you. But if you have questions about it, I'm glad to address those. But I don't know if I should go further on that. Hopefully that kind of gives you like an intro to this triple melting pot, and how Protestant, Jews, Catholics kind of clash with each other. I will say that the Catholics have been for 2,000 years have been the enemy of the Jews. And you see this in the Acts of the Apostles. You see this in the Gospels. You see this as the church is developing while it's young. And it's crazy because the Jews kind of disappear from the story for a while, and then they kind of pick back up in the Middle Ages. Because the Jews, a couple things happen to them that really, brings them down a lot of pegs, which is the destruction of the temple. Sorry, Mike. Oh my goodness. The destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And then you have the Bar Kokhba rebellion in the 130s, where Rome puts down these Jewish rebellions very definitively. A lot of Jews die. A lot of Jews are dispersed. So their power wanes for a long time, but they come back in the Middle Ages. And they're doing other stuff too in other places. But in terms of the Christian story, they really come back in the Middle Ages strongly. And it's been a clash. And you have the church fathers, you have different people in the Middle Ages talking about this relation we have in the Jews. Go read Lateran 4. Read the documents of Lateran 4. Like, the Jews and the Muslims are addressed in Lateran 4. This is a ecumenical council of the church. So the fact, and I understand the church's, to an extent, I understand the church's view now is like, to an extent, the Jews have a huge influence on the church just because they're so powerful today. When you have usury legal in society, you will have powerful Jews. There's just never been a society where those two have not been connected straight up, for 2,000 years. And the church is heavily influenced by money. There's no doubt about it. But the church is also concerned, in World War II, there was a persecution of the Jews, and I'm not going to get into it, but, the Jews were doing crazy stuff. There's no lie about that. But then also what the Nazis potentially did, the Nazis were pretty brutal. They could be pretty brutal. So there's both realities there. And the church had a front row seat at that because the church helped a lot of Jews survive that. Pius XII in the Vatican, neutral state. It's a whole deal. I'm kind of getting in the weeds here. What was I going to talk about with the Jews? Just the Catholic and the Jew relationship has been very, very tumultuous. We've always been at each other. But the Catholic position has always been like, we can never let the Jew, what is the thing Michael Jones is always saying? It's from like Gregory the Great, where it's like, you never let the Jew corrupt Catholic society, but you have no right to harm the Jew. That's what he talks about, I think. I think it's Gregory the Great. So that's our position on them. We need to understand like what they're trying to do and how they think. They're tribal. They're out there for themselves. They're not universal. They don't have these universal morals that Christians do. But we have to love them when we pray for their conversion. And I went over Ratisbonne. That's an amazing conversion story from a French Jewish man. And then I hope the connection made sense with the Protestants and the Jews with the Old Testament, how that works out. Do I want to do anything else on this? I think there was something else I wanted to talk about. Yeah, and then like obviously the Protestants, they're justifying theft. And then you can see how the Old Testament affects them in terms of their thought process and how, the biggest one being divorce. And then they're folding on contraception, they're folding on all this stuff because their religion is based on what is the word? Sorry, I'm struggling with words right now. It's based on a compromise, basically. So if you compromised 500 years ago, why wouldn't you compromise now? And they keep compromising. And that's why Protestant cultures usually lead to atheism and agnosticism, straight up. And obviously the Jews encourage this. I'm going to stop there. I could go on forever. There's so many different connections, but hopefully that's a good starter pack. And then if anyone has more questions, I'll be happy to run through it. I still haven't read Christopher Dawson's histories on this stuff, so I do need to do that. I don't know if he goes into this as much, but he's a good one. All right, but anyway, hopefully you enjoyed that. The triple melting pot, a little discussion. That's going to be it for this week. I will probably not do an episode this weekend. I'll see you back on Monday, God willing. And until then, God bless you. God be with you. And I will see you on the next episode. Good night.